welcome into the Off Central podcast. We're so glad that you've decided to join us here today. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. We have the Mr. Tony, the brain doctor, the mental health expert, therapist, and all-around good guy. Thank you so much for coming in here today to
Thanks for having me.
Share some of your thoughts and insights. And no Pastor Larry today, but we're very happy that you were able to fill in and take that spot today. So thanks so much for coming in, Tony.
Hey, man, thank you for having me. It's awesome being here.
Yeah, well, it's today I want to dive in, and we want to dive into some mental health stuff. And recently we just had you preach in church up on stage again. So it must have been fun flexing those muscles again. I'm sure it's been a little while, but But I can honestly say, I said this from stage, but I can say this here as well. I sat there at the side of the stage, and I was just on the edge of my seat absorbing some of the material. One, because of how helpful it is, the tools that you give us, and some of the insights and the way that you weave in the intersection of mental health and scripture and faith, and how those two things blend so seamlessly in your philosophy of your work and what you do. So that was really impactful for me. And I was also just struck with how much hope I had for some people listening to some of the things that you were sharing. And I'm always cautioning people against, when I'm preaching, about trying to name other people that need to hear this because of the whole plank thing in my own eye, and making sure that I self-critique and self-examine. But I just know that there were so many people in that room who it would have been incredibly helpful for. That's just the nature of being a pastor, as we get into people's lives, into people's mess a little bit more.
Yep.
And so just can't thank you enough for what you shared there. And
it's an incredible opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to do it. That's the whole goal, right? Just helping people, being a positive effect on others' lives, and helping them to see Christ a little bit clearer and be as healthy as we can be.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that in mind, over the next 25 minutes, thought we'd dive into some stuff today. And technically this is titled Mental Health at Work. But one of the things I kind of wanted to talk today and pick apart and pick your brains on is mental health, and how do we recognize it in people either at work or not even just at work. We could maybe broaden that pool a little bit and go people that maybe we're close to or we're around on a regular basis. How do we spot these things, and how do we approach it? And so I think there's a lot of things we can tease out in there, and maybe give people tools, not so much on how to deal with their own mental health, but maybe how to help people that are around them, and to see signs. And so one of the first questions I have is, how can we distinguish between someone who's just having a tough week, or a tough month, or a tough year, versus somebody who's really slipping into maybe a cycle of habitual mental illness, if you like. And what is the difference? Is there a difference actually between somebody who's like just having a bad week? Would we classify that as a mental problem? Or would we just classify that as a bad week? Were we afraid to put labels on that? So maybe talk about that. What are some of the signs, and what should people be looking out for?
I think when it's just stress, a tough day, a tough week, it's transient. So the symptoms aren't going to be as predominant. They're going to pass. Everybody gets stressed out, right? So stress, depression, anxiety, burnout, all that stuff, they all have symptoms that cross over. So like concentration, if you're stressed out, you can't concentrate the way you normally would. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, you're not going to be able to concentrate. So that's one that goes through all of them. Disruption in sleep. It's going to look a little different, but sleep can be a problem. Mood swings can be an issue. They're more irritable, or they're down, or whatnot. So, and it depends on the makeup of the person too, what they're going to deal with more so. So like with depression, it's more predominant in men to see anger than it is in women.
So depression expresses itself as like anger, irritable or explosive, or like a resentful anger, or all of those things?
Can be, yep.
So I don't know, somebody arrives 5 minutes late and the explosion or the irritation is just out of proportion, maybe to, or those are the kinds of things we're looking for is just anger or irritability at things that are quite minor.
So someone could be dealing with depression, and there's other symptoms besides that, but I think when people think of depression, they think of they're crying all the time, they're isolating away from everyone, and that's a part of it, but it can show up, and again, this is more so in men, but it can show up with outbursts of anger, and they're just irritable, nasty, and it's not who they are, but it's what they're dealing with, and that can actually be a sign of depression, so we'll miss that. They're just being a jerk, or they're just being, man, what's their problem? They're always angry or whatever, and they're actually depressed. But it's where you have to look deeper. But I think the stressed out, and if it's lasting for a year, then that's a problem. And that could be classified as a mental health deal because it's lasting for an extended period of time. So if someone's depressed, if they're showing signs of depression, they've been that way for multiple weeks, then that would start to lend, okay, maybe this is heading towards that direction.
Right.
But if they're just stressed out, they can have some of the same symptoms, but it's not going to be as persistent. It's not going to be as profound. So that's one of the ways we can tell.
It's because I think of people like, if I take like a very public figure, somebody like a Robin Williams, who's, I think many of us, when I say that, will be familiar with his story. Somebody who's a famous comedian, funny man, just constantly going. And if you watch him in interviews, how sharp and witty he is. But yet, if you watch him kind of when he's away from the audience interviews, one-on-one, you get to some of the things in his heart, and he shares like real pain and depth of pain and difficulty in struggling with it. And I just think sometimes people become such masters and so adept at being the chameleon or hiding stress or things that they're dealing with. And it can be really hard to distinguish between where's the authentic person and what's the veneer that people tend to cover themselves.
And I think you find that in the Christian culture a lot.
I think more so sometimes in church. I can't help but think there's a greater veneer to people who walk into like a church or religious setting than there is in almost any other circumstance or environment that people find themselves in.
That's right.
People come with their families all dressed in their Sunday best, and everyone's showered, but in the car it's been yelling and chaos and screaming and high stress scenarios. And as people of faith, I can't help but think that we somehow have this stigma against mental health, and so we do everything that we can, particularly for people who are employed in the church, do everything that we can to try and hide and to guard ourselves, because we're meant to be the people helping other people. So we can't be dealing with stress or with depression or anxiety. So that's really helpful. You talked about how like anger or irritability can be sort of one of those obvious signs. Are there signs when it's not particularly obvious? Are there things to look out for, or red flags or moments, or can you is it like watching them in stressful scenarios to see what the response is like? And is it, or do we just look for things that are out of pattern or out of the ordinary? Are those more the telltale signs?
Yeah, I think that and again, if someone's not being honest, meaning they have that veneer because they're supposed to have it all together. I mean, look, when I worked with Thrive Behavioral Health, it wasn't an option. It was mandatory that as an LC, if you were coming up and you didn't have your full licensure yet, you had to meet with a supervisor weekly. And part of that was to go over your cases and things, but also deal with what you have to deal with. Once you're through that, you're an LC or you're you're fully licensed, whether as a social worker or a counselor. It was mandatory for you to meet with a supervisor once a week. Everybody did. Supervisors did, because you have to have somebody to process things with.
Right.
And if you're starting to feel burnt out, if you're starting to feel down, then they were okay with you saying, you know what, you need to cancel your clients for today or schedule them for a different day, to take a day just to relax, work on you. And that's really important, because if we try to be Superman, Superwoman, that's a really good path to falling apart because you're not perfect and you're not that strong. Everybody has emotions. Everybody is human, and everybody's going to be affected, especially, I mean, there's been some things recently that were pretty traumatic that's happened in our church. That's a big deal. And while we need to be there for others, we need to be there for ourselves, and even more so, we need to allow others to be there for us and to be honest about what we're feeling. This is how I'm feeling about this. This is how it's affected me, and I need to talk to somebody. That's not a sign of weakness. That's strength. This whole thing of being stoic is strength, is foolishness. It's being real and honest. That's strength. So it's really important to just say, hey, I'm struggling right now, man. I need a day, or I need to talk to somebody, or seeking out help. You know, I mean, if it's to that place where you need to seek out professional therapy, okay. If not, then you talk to someone that you trust at work, or, you know, like a supervisor, or if it's you're talking to Pastor Larry's talking to you, talking to Jet, whatnot. It's really important to open up and get that stuff out. Just talking about it can be very helpful. Just getting it out in the open.
Why is it talking is so helpful?
I think because you're processing it while you're doing it, and anything in secret has power. As long as we keep it in the dark and we keep it secret, our minds can start to turn. We can start to talk to ourselves, and we all have blind spots. So others are going to see things that we can't see in ourselves. It's easier to point it out in someone else, but I can't see it myself. So I have to be open to allowing someone to speak into my life and be vulnerable and honest enough to share what I'm dealing with. You know what I mean? And I think just talking about it can help us. I mean, that's one of the things about talk therapy is just you're getting it out and you're talking. And in doing that, you're kind of like figuring stuff. You're starting to figure things out. You're saying things that you weren't necessarily thinking. And you kind of go, wow, it hit me. You know what I mean? But then also allow someone else to hear what you're saying and be able to give feedback. Again, seeing that blind spot where maybe you're not seeing how you're thinking. And they point it out and it kind of clicks. You're like, okay, yeah, that's totally the wrong way to be looking at this. That'd be very helpful.
I have to say that aligns with my experience of therapy as well, in that, you know, scripture says that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. It doesn't say the brain thinks.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting distinction to make, because we think that we think about whatever is in our heart, when in reality, sometimes in therapy, I will just start talking, and in the process of talking, I'll say something that I didn't realize was in there, but because I hadn't processed it in my mind, and so I thought it didn't reside in my heart.
Yeah.
And in the process of saying stuff, I'm like, this is all coming out, and I've never thought this before. I've never sat down and processed this, but my mouth is revealing something that is overflowing inside of my heart. But it's like it takes like it's almost like you have to get the ball rolling to get there. Like, you know what I mean? It takes a while to tune in to what's going in with yourself, or what's happening with yourself, but before your mouth can kind of begin to tune into what's happening in your heart. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. And it also, over time, as you're talking and you're processing, looking in the past, processing all of that, things will pop out, like things that were said to you as a child, or things that were said just whenever, things that happened, and you're not thinking about that. You're not connecting the dots. And as you're talking, a statement will come out and you're like, whoa, that's huge. You know what I mean? And it totally shows the line of from that to what you're thinking and what you're feeling right now. And that alone can bring a lot of relief. So it could be as easy as someone like the fear of failure, and they had a coach or their parent or a friend ridiculed them because they failed at something. So now failure is bad, and they've grown up with that, and now they have a fear of failure, because if I fail, it means I'm not good enough. And they have a fear of that, so that, you know, and all that's entangled, but you don't connect it to that thing in the past. But when you do, it can just bring freedom. You're like, whoa, that's why. So it's not me. It's a belief that I had, and it's separate from me. It's not about me being a problem. It's about my belief being a problem.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very freeing.
And And I think like that's why looking for signs is so important, because, you know, we have all these emotions or all these motivations like fear of failure, fear of rejection, not being seen, and all of these stack up throughout our life. Particularly as, you know, we've talked about before, particularly in our formative years as a kid, like we absorb this without even having the architecture to process any of it. We can't articulate what's going on. We just know mum didn't hug me or whatever it is, you know, that feeling is what we feel. But we have all of these sort of layered motives and emotions and agendas, but there's always a top emotion that wins out eventually. And these are kind of the signs that we're looking for. Is although it's expressed, for example, we've talked about anger. Anger is just the top emotion that tends to win out in stress.
Yes.
But we've got 50 other things that are really below the surface, and this is what we're trying to deal with. Is that how I'm understanding that? Is that a good picture?
So like with anger is a secondary emotion. It's very rarely the issue. It's just because it's big and it's loud that we see it. But what's the emotion you're experiencing underneath that leads you to anger? Is it disrespect? Is it being disappointed, embarrassed? Is it pain, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain? Like, what is that thing that takes you to that place? So if I can figure out what that is, so what I'll do is I'll give it's a printout called the anger iceberg, and it's just like a drawing of an iceberg, and underneath is all these different emotions, and I'll have, like, once you look at it, you can go, yeah, like when I get disappointed, it really does like annoy me. When I'm frustrated, I tend to get to anger quickly, or if I'm embarrassed or whatever it is, and I'll have them highlight it. Now let's work on those. Because again, back to the tree and the fruit, if we're just looking at what is on the outside, what we're seeing, then we're never going to get to the answer.
One of the best analogies, I've heard the tree, you know, the fruit tree and the Christmas tree analogy for 20 odd years, you know, the fruits of the Spirit. You gave an analogy on the fruit of the Spirit that was so simple, and I wrote it down, and it was so profound. You said so often, you know, we'll plant an orange tree and hoping for apples, and the tree grows up and it starts producing oranges, not apples, and we get frustrated. And so what do? We pick off all the oranges, and then we go, next year I'll get the apples. And I was like, that is such a great image for the cycle and the repetitive cycle that people get stuck in trying to deal with anger, the top emotion. You know, to go back to, I'm mixing two analogies here, but anger being the top emotion, or picking the orange from the tree,
It's the same thing.
and then going, if I just deal with the anger, but really it's the root of the tree. It's all of these things below. And until you get into a space where you can start talking and processing, what is it that is beneath the surface here? And we need people like you, usually trained professionals, to help us get to that place, to ask the right questions. And because we don't like to go there by ourselves. You know, if we did, we would all do it.
Right. And like I came up with this stuff, like there's like the addiction tree, and there's these different type of things, but I started thinking about it like for kids, because when I was working with children, they can't process things the way we do. If I'm working with a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, I'm trying to figure out why they're having explosions in class, or they're, you know, there's different things that are going on. So often they'll be seen as the bad kid because they're having outbursts of anger, they're not listening. Man, you're missing it. You're never going to figure it out, and you're never going to help this child. So I started figuring out, okay, so how can I explain this in a way that they'll get, and I'd make it funny and get them laughing and goofy and stuff. And then I realized, you know, this is what adults need to hear too. We all need to hear this. Just a simple way. And that's what Jesus did. You know, I mean, the kingdom of heaven is like a wheat field. The kingdom of heaven is like a tree, or, you know, I mean, tell a tree by its fruit. He used these things. So I'm like, so why am I not? So let me use that fruit from what he said. And yeah, that's why like when I was working with addicts, you'd see people coming in and they'd be like, I've been struggling, like every day I have to figure out a way or a reason why I'm not going to drink. And I'm like, dude, you're missing it. That should not be the case. And it's because you haven't dealt with the stuff that's underneath.
You're fighting the urge.
Yep.
You're not fighting the root cause of why that urge is popping up. So Is that another way to say it?
Yep.
So you touched a little bit on like boundaries with people, and I want to talk more about that. But just before we get into maybe how to create, because I think there's always conflation between how do we give people compassion versus how do we also protect our own hearts and our own sort of interior world. But again, before we jump into that, if somebody is noticing, some of these flags, maybe anger or resentment or withdrawal or whatever it is in somebody, something that's out of the norm, and there's a real concern there. As a licensed practitioner, do you think there are good etiquette ways to approach somebody? Because, the last thing we want to do is to be unprofessional and be like, dude, I really think you have a problem. Yeah. I've some people have that approach. I've never found it particularly helpful in my life. And so how do we approach people without them being defensive? And I get that we can't always control other people's responses. Maybe they just become defensive. Okay. But what are things that we can do to mitigate that as best as possible and to approach people with authenticity, without being patronizing? I'm always like, when's it my space and when's it my right or my purview to step into somebody's personal business, and when is it not? And so those boundaries, and I'm sure that will be different depending on the workplace and the relationship and stuff. But do you have any just very practical nuts and bolts kind of tips for people in terms of how to approach somebody they really see struggling?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost is true concern, and it not being about how it's affecting me, but them. You know what I mean? Do
you think that's a common thing? People will jump to how it's affecting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're all selfish to the core. You're right.
Right.
And
so it's affecting your work, and that work is affecting,
comfortability.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay, especially when we get to boundaries, being okay with it being uncomfortable. But it's really, and we're going to go at it because we want the workplace to be a place that's peaceful and prosperous for all of us. But if someone's struggling, am I going to them because I really have concern for them? And I think relationship gives us permission to speak into someone's life. So if I was at a workplace and I noticed that there was a change in someone, or I've been noticed for a while that there's something not right, their mood's different, they're more withdrawn or more irritable or whatnot. Because I don't have that deeper relationship, I'm not going to know what's going on. So maybe I go to someone who does have that relationship and say, look, these are some of the things I've been seeing. Maybe you can speak into that, because just let them do it, because it'll be well received from them.
Right.
But if I do approach someone, I think expressing the concern that you have for them and that you want to make sure they're okay, and asking open-ended questions to spark a conversation.
So what would an example of an open-ended question look like?
I've noticed that you haven't been as happy as you normally are. Is everything okay? I just want to make sure that you're doing good. So what's been happening in your world? I can't say yes or no to what's been happening in your world. Or I notice you're not as jovial as you normally are.
Right.
What's been going on? And
right.
How can I help? Because I'm here for you. And I think when you approach someone like that, they're more open and wanting to share. Because it's not about what I'm doing wrong. It's about you caring about me and wanting to know how you can help me.
Right. The motive can't be about, we need to get you back to a place of efficiency.
Right. You gotta make me money, man. So
yeah, dude, you got a job to do, suck it up.
Right. So it's really having that compassion and that concern for their well-being over everything else.
Right.
So I think those are the main things, you know what I mean?
Because outside of a work environment, when it comes to close friends, for example, I feel like personally that's one of the hardest things to do.
Really?
If somebody hasn't chosen to open up to me, I always, and maybe this is my own issue, but sometimes I feel like, well, if they haven't opened up to me, it's not my place to prod too much, or they're not ready yet, or, I think sometimes we tell ourselves, well, they know I'm always here for them.
Yeah, but people become, especially when you're becoming depressed or you're starting to really spiral, or you're because things get dark, you don't think right. You know what I mean? You're not thinking clearly. And sometimes it takes a person saying, hey, especially when you have that relationship, you can speak right into it and say, hey man, something's not up here. You know what I mean? There's something going on. I've noticed you're more withdrawn, you're irritable, you're sadder, you're not hanging out like you used to. I'm here for you. Let's talk. What's going on?
Right.
And in those cases, and I think it's important for us to do that. And I think we can misread, for instance, let's say someone's depressed and and you see this within families a lot, not a lot, but you see it within families where someone's been depressed for a long time. They've had some suicidal thoughts. They've expressed it, and then out of nowhere, they're just really happy. And people say, man, they're doing better. And it could be that they've got a plan now, and it's about to be over. And that joy, that happiness will be linked with other things, like if they're giving things away, or if they're writing letters, or if they're talking to you in a way that they're saying goodbye. And it just feels like that seems off. You know what I mean? We have to pay attention to those things. But that happiness that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, when you've been depressed for months and you've had thoughts of suicide, now all of a sudden you're really happy, that's very concerning. Because they could have a plan that I'm happy because the pain's about to be done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a common, that's a big red flag to look out for.
It really is. But if we don't know, we can only do what we know.
Because the assumption would be that whatever it is, they've worked it out and they're all good and they're back again and and here we go. And actually it's kind of the time to be most concerned and sort of vigilant.
Yep. And it's because it hasn't been my experience when someone is dealing with depression for an extended period of time and they're in it and they've had suicidal ideation that in a turn they're all of a sudden just okay. Everything's fine now. That's not the norm. So it takes time and work to get to the place where you're feeling better.
Yeah.
You know, but if it's that quick of a turn, then that's a big red flag, and something needs to be said. You need to speak into it and say, ma'am, no, like you're way too happy right now. And that seems like a weird thing to say, right? Something's up. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? And especially if you're noticing that they're getting rid of things, or they're talking to you in that way that they're saying goodbye, I love you, and
yeah,
that kind of thing.
Right.
I can't think of every word to say, but it's where where you sense that it's important to step up and say, yeah, we need to get you more help. We need to talk into this. And unfortunately, when someone gets to a point where they're going to do that, there's, especially in men attempt less than women, but men succeed when they attempt most of the time.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
So, and it's once that decision has been made, and they want to do it, your chance of you stopping them is not high.
It's very right.
Which is sad. But
once they've kind of formed that mental picture in their heart, what they're going to do.
Yeah, and it comes back to that secrecy, not being open. It's so important to talk and to realize that we're all broke. We all need help. We all have times when we need to work through things, all of us. So it's just being, yeah. And I noticed one of the questions you were asking was about vulnerability and how vulnerable we should be. And I think it's really important for us to be vulnerable with one another. And as a leader, or as someone who's helping, or someone who's on staff with others, I think it's important to be vulnerable to a point, like trauma dumping and things, right?
Right. You can't, air all of your dirty laundry for everybody to see all the time.
Yeah. One, it's not healthy, but two, you're setting yourself up. I mean, there's things that I would never share with anybody except a very trusted individual that I've known for a long time, and you've proven your reliability, like that you're going to keep this confidential. So I'm not going to share those things with anybody else. And I think it's okay. It's okay and it's wise to do that. And if we're helping, sometimes we want to share to let people know that I understand what you're talking about, but we only go so far, because then it becomes about us. And people can't handle that. I mean, you're talking about trauma dumping, you're dumping some serious stuff on somebody who's not prepared for that or able to handle that. Right. That's not going to make it better.
Just going to make you feel worse, because they're going to feel awkward. The relationship will get tense. Nothing gets resolved.
Mm-hmm. And if they're talking to you about something and we're like trying to share this show, because I'll do that sometimes as a therapist. We'll share something because it builds relationship, like that
rapport.
Yeah, therapeutic relationship, the rapport. It builds that, but it can't be all the time, and it needs to be select, and it needs to be at the appropriate moment. to say this is a time that I can share for them because I can see that you're uneasy. So let me share something about me that helps you understand that you're not alone. And we all go through this, but you need to limit how much you share because it's not my therapy session, right? It's not about me. It's about them. But it's all, again, it comes down to it's all about them and what I can do for them, getting myself out of the way, considering others above ourselves.
Is there a point in a conversation where people, someone like me, for example, at what point in a conversation do I need to recognize this is beyond me?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know what, I'm stepping into a realm and I'm poking or I'm asking questions and I could be making things worse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, where's the line? And there's no like line, obviously, but again, telltale signs, or what are things we should be looking out for where we can be a helpful friend or we can be a compassionate colleague versus stepping into stuff that you're actually going to, you know, you're going to stir up things from their past. And if you're not there or you don't have the tools to help them through it, you're actually just going to make things a lot worse.
Right.
And can we make things worse?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if we don't, I think all of us could. Like, if we don't know how to lead someone and what you're looking for, then it can make it worse because they get caught up in that place or they feel like I can't do what is being asked of me. And we can jump in like someone, and I think the ones who can do this the most are those who have been through therapy. So now they're a therapist.
Yeah, because they're an expert because they had 10 sessions.
Mm-hmm. And now this is what worked for me. So all you got to do is some breathing techniques, do a little coping, and then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Look, what? That's great. I mean, I've had kids. Okay, I'll go back to kids. I've had kids and adults that I had this one boy, man. He was awesome. I met with him for 12 sessions. He was fine. I mean, he was really depressed and anxious, stuff going on at home. And it was because he believed everything was his fault. And he was the one causing the problems. I did the triangle with him, taught him some coping skills. This is a kid. I'm sorry, he wasn't even 12. He was 9. I'm sorry, he was 9. And he just did what I asked him to do. 12 sessions, he was done. He's like, yeah, I'm great.
It's just like, you're like, if only it could be this easy.
And the parents were like, oh, he's doing so much better. His schoolwork's doing better. He's He's happier. He's out playing again, blah, 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 blah. And so let's say you have an adult that's how it worked for him. Well, that's how it should work for everybody. You just do the stuff and everything's good.
Right.
But it's not that simple.
Yeah, the heart can't be so formulaic. The mind
and we don't know the depth of what's going on. And, you know, if you get into trauma, and that's some deep, dark stuff, it can be. You know, some trauma can be because they had a car accident. Now they're having reactions to that, where others can be from years of abuse that run deep and deal with a lot, and like just spreads like roots under a tree, just spread out, and it's going into every area. And and you have anxiety, depression, symptoms from trauma, and it's not even about the depression and anxiety. That's being caused by the trauma. But there's a way to deal with that, and understanding that it's not just about doing a couple of coping skills or some breathing techniques. Man, your neurological system is out of whack, and that takes specific work to get that back in line.
Right.
And being able to look at someone with confidence and say, you're going to get through this. You're not the only one. This is what's happening. And I think knowledge, the knowledge is huge, to be able to give someone the knowledge that you're not crazy.
Right.
Because people think they are. Like, I'm losing it. What's wrong with me? And when you explain it to them, they're like, oh, that's it? Yeah, that's it. We're going to do the work, man. You'll be all right. But I think if you don't have the training, you don't know that. And then also I think I think you can sense it. Like, if someone's talking about suicidal thoughts and stuff, then you just need to get them help.
That's a level that's beyond.
Yeah. Or if it's just continuing and they have, like, they're just not able to see past their own nose for all the thoughts and the feelings that they're in. You just need to step out and be there as a support and love them, but say you really should seek professional help. And it's not about like you're nuts or anything. I hate that. It's just, we all need it. And if you've been in a situation where you've had therapy before, you share that. Yeah, I did it. It was very helpful, but I'm not trained, so I can't help you the way they can.
Right. You don't try and take them through the same process you went through. You just reassure them in that, hey, everyone needs help. I've needed it at points in my life and my history. And I think this is a point where you need it as well.
Absolutely. And therapists get therapy.
Right. Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks therapists got it all together. Nope.
Right.
You have to process through stuff, especially when you hear a story that is horrendous and it affects you.
It's a real gift, and not only a gift, it's a skill to be able to develop coping mechanisms to hear trauma without taking on trauma. Like, that's a proper developed skill. Mm-hmm. And some people have a greater capacity of that skill honed over many years of practice to guard themselves from it. And the reality is, if you're not a therapist or you've never learned any of those coping mechanisms, you're just as likely to absorb the spirit of heaviness and depression and sadness or anger or whatever it is onto yourself just as easily, or even more easily, obviously, than a therapist. Like, one of the boundaries I always set, people want to meet with me. I'm always happy to meet, with compassion. And I just tell them, one, I'm not a therapist. So I won't be able to guide you through like mental mapping or whatever it is that therapists do. I function maybe more as a coach. I can give you some insights, ideas, things that worked for me. And if you don't do them, I don't have the compassion to be like, you didn't do them. So, so I'll give you one session, and, if none of that helps, I know that 10 more sessions will not help. Like, I'll meet as a friend, but in terms of trying to work through trauma, it will be of zero benefit to you, and it will frustrate the pair of us. Mm-hmm. And it's just a simple boundary and a limitation. I know that if it didn't work after an hour, it's not going to work after 10. Right. But with you, it's very different. I'm assuming that you would think it's never going to work in an hour, and it probably won't work after 10. But I know at some point I can move the ball forward here.
Yeah. There's some that I'll meet with for a few months and it's over. They're doing better. They feel good. They can move on. And there's other clients that I've met with for 5 years because there's just so much to work on.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not because they're not trying or they don't want to do it, but when it's so deep rooted and it's spreading out to multiple facets of their life, it just takes time to process through it. Mm. So you just got to help them understand this isn't going to happen overnight.
Sure.
If you do the work, you'll succeed. If you don't, you won't. So put to practice what we talk about, and be okay when you don't, because there's going to be times when you don't, and that's okay, because we all fail, and that's a part of being human.
Right.
And I think saying that to people, like, I've noticed, like, they'll laugh, but I can see the relief when they'll say, I'm feeling this and blah, 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 and I'll say, welcome to being human.
That's the human experience.
That is humanity. And they kind of look at me and they're like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So we all deal with it, brother.
My pastor used to say, like, no one gets a free pass on pain or suffering.
Nope.
No one does. Everyone's is different, but everyone goes through it in their unique way. Mm-hmm. And we all have to learn how to manage it. We're kind of approaching the end of this. Just a couple more maybe quick fire questions. Are there any lines or phrases that you wish people would just retire? Would just stop saying, like, if somebody's going through difficulty or maybe is trying to open up or are there things that you see where you just think, man, if your friend could just stop telling you that, because I have to undo all of this work.
I think diagnosing people like they're narcissists, they have bipolar.
Right. Yeah. Non-professionals diagnosing people with true, real mental illness problems. Like the percentage of actual narcissists in our culture is like less than 1%.
Yes. It's very
low. 50% of all men get diagnosed with narcissism.
I'm telling you, man, it's like you see it being thrown around. That's narcissistic. They're narcissists. It's like, my gosh, stop.
Right.
Like, if we're going to base it on that, then we're all narcissists.
And I think what people are really saying is that was a selfish action.
Yeah.
But, just because you're sad doesn't mean you live with depression. Right. And so being mildly selfish doesn't make you a narcissist in the clinical sense.
I mean, that's a personality. And I don't think we understand what we're saying. That's a personality disorder. That's like a major thing. It's not something that changes.
Right.
Personality disorders are there, and you can learn to cope with them, to manage them, but they don't go away. So it's, telling someone they're borderline or histrionic and all this stuff. It's like, dude, just stop. You're just putting labels on people, which we've become really good at doing, but that's actually a cognitive distortion, labeling people. So and I'll see it within the mental health field.
Do you tell people you have a mental health problem with labeling people?
Right. I'll sit and listen to all this stuff, and okay, you're categorizing people by certain physical traits or by certain beliefs and things. That's polarized thinking. You're jumping to conclusions about people based on certain things. That's jumping to conclusions, mental filtering, negative mental filtering, and it's being done in the mental health field. Why are we okay with operating in cognitive distortions and saying it's okay? I don't get it. So that's frustrating. But yeah, like just
be slow to diagnose somebody with bipolar or whatever it is.
If I'm with someone and I feel they could qualify for a personality disorder, it takes a long time before I'll diagnose them with it. I'm not just going to label them with that because it's complicated, and there's so many things. Like I've seen people who have been diagnosed with a psychotic disorder or have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and it was trauma. I can think of one person in particular who went 15 years dealing with hearing voices and all this stuff, and on medications, psychotropics. He says nothing's helping, it's not getting better. And we start doing the eye movement and the light. He said, man, I can't believe this. Wow. He said, I've been doing this 15 years and it's a light that's going to help me. Like, I don't know anything about all that, but all I know is this works, and it is trauma, and he's made huge steps forward, has shown improvement neurologically, emotionally, all of it. But he got diagnosed because it's a quick diagnosis. You have these symptoms, you're acting like this, you're hearing voices, you must be psychotic. Like, wow.
Right. It's funny, this harken back to like primary school ethics and etiquette that we would learn. Primary, so I'm being very English, but young kids would learn don't call other kids names. Right. And it's basically the same etiquette. We have to be very careful about what name we give somebody. That's right. Or diagnosis, or even better, let's not even play in a realm that we don't understand.
Right.
And just be there for people.
That's it.
Being there for people and being open and vulnerable, which is straight back to like Brené Brown's classic realization on the TED Talk that you just can't love people until you are open and vulnerable with them.
That's right.
And your capacity to be vulnerable with people will limit your capacity to love people and to connect with them. And Tony, thank you so much. We dived in the deep end there, but I think there's some really helpful tools for people and insights in there. So always appreciate your time and you coming in and sharing some of your hard-earned expertise.
Thank you for having me, man. It's always a joy.
Yeah,
helping you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're just a huge fan of the work that you do, and just pray nothing but the best for you and your future. And hey, look, if you're struggling, or if you know somebody who's struggling with mental health issues, please feel free to always reach out to us here at Central, and we can try and connect you in the best way that we can. Be brave enough, be vulnerable enough to reach out in compassion to those in your world, because we want to love people where they are, but we also want to love people enough to move them forward and help them be the best version of themselves. So I pray that in some way this has enriched your life. Have a blessed week. Grace and peace to all of you.